What is up, you guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to another gruesome Get Ready With Me video. If this is your first time seeing my face, my name is Jessica, and in each of these videos I sit down here with you and I talk about a different true crime case whilst I put on some makeup. So if you're into that sort of thing, I'd say subscribe, because then you get to join us back here each week. And doesn't that sound fun? If not, that's fine too. I've got some links down in the description for those of you who'd rather hear the story sans the makeup. But for those of you who are sticking around, let's go ahead and get into today's case. All right, you guys, buckle up and get yourselves ready, because today's story, today's story. Let's just say, to put it mildly, and to quote Danielle Kirsty, today's story, it's gonna make your blood boil. It is just like the most senseless and entitled, selfish, egotistical, supercilious, just other adjectives. The story I have for you today is probably one of the most arrogant displays of self-aggrandizement I have ever come across. The killer in today's story quite literally snuffed out the life of an innocent human being solely to protect their own reputation. At least that's my opinion, so like I said, buckle up, because you're about to be pissed. This, my friends, is the harrowing story of the murder of Ty Underwood. Okay, so our story today takes place in Texas. Ultimately, we're going to end up in Tyler, Texas. That's where the actual crime in today's story takes place. But for starters, the beginning has us headed to Lufkin, Texas. With a population of just 40,000 people, Lufkin is a small town located in eastern Texas, just about 90 minutes northeast of Houston. And while yes, an hour and a half is a pretty short jaunt in the grand scheme of things, despite Lufkin's close proximity to Houston, which is an absolutely massive city, Lufkin itself does still manage to maintain a peaceful, quaint, sort of small town vibe. However, on the flip side of that though, because it is so close to such a big city, living in Lufkin, residents do still have easy access to the city's amenities. Shopping, medical facilities, government buildings, museums. Based on the very minimal research I did into Lufkin specifically, it kind of seems like it has the best of both worlds to offer as far as urban and suburban life goes. Plus, they proudly boast on the city's website about their top-notch golf courses and their superior bass fishing. So what's not to like? We're talking here about the finer things in life. And this, my friends, this little slice of a Texas paradise, is where Ty Underwood was born. Tyrone Lee Underwood Jr. was born on October 24th, 1990 in Lufkin to Yolanda Ford and Tyrone Underwood Sr. And yes, as you've likely gathered by this point in the story, although Ty was assigned male at birth, she felt more drawn to a traditionally feminine way of life. Therefore, throughout the majority of hers, she did choose to identify as a woman. And before anyone gets their underwear in a wad, if you don't agree with this, if you don't agree with how Ty lived her life, and if you don't agree with my respect for the trans community, if you are anti-LGBTQIA+, do not use the comment section of this video as a sounding board for your ignorance and bigotry. I am begging you. Instead, I would urge you to take the time that you would have spent writing out that comment and use it to reflect on why what other people do in their bedrooms or what other people have in their pants has you so fucking bothered. Because this ain't the place for you to spew your hate and your vitriol. Just like I probably can't change your closed up hillbilly mind, you can't change mine. I will always be an ally to a marginalized community, and I will always be a proponent for people living their most authentic lives and doing what feels right to them, provided they are not hurting themselves or anyone else. Not to mention that I know from doing this as long as I have, that there is a very real possibility that someone, if not multiple people, who knew Ty personally will come across this video. So I refuse to let the comment section be anything other than a source of support and love and condolences. Ty was absolutely adored by her family and by her friends. She was loving and caring, and she was a light in the lives of those who knew her. She lived every single day of her life to the absolute fullest, never even considering holding back on who she was or what she wanted. Even growing up in a wildly conservative area where inherently most people would not agree with her way of life, Ty still lived completely authentically to who she was inside because she just wasn't afraid of anything. If anything, I'd say that the only thing that scared her was a life half lived. So when it came down to her either living her truest life or the world accepting who she was, she would have chosen to live her most authentic life to the fullest every time. She was a headstrong and determined person whose life's motto was, if there's a will, there's a way. And as far as Ty was concerned, she was not planning on letting anyone stand in hers. When Ty was in her early 20s, she packed up everything she owned and she moved just shy of 100 miles northwest from Lufkin to Tyler, Texas. And unlike Lufkin, Tyler was certainly more of a big city type atmosphere and more upbeat sort of vibe. It's much more populated. It's much more fast paced. It's almost twice the size. However, just like Lufkin, Tyler was also ultra conservative. One source I reference called it the buckle of the Bible Belt, if that's any indication for you. But Tyler is definitely a heavily religious city, and although there is an LGBTQ population there, as there is anywhere, overall, they are definitely more reserved, and they do tend to keep more to themselves in Tyler than they do in like Houston, Austin, Corpus Christi. There are definitely more progressive, or dare I even say liberal, areas of Texas, but Tyler, unfortunately, just wasn't one of those places. And I don't know about you, but that really does make me sad to think about. To think that it is a reality all over the world for all kinds of people. Not just LGBTQIA individuals, although that's the main focus here today, but it will never get easier for me knowing that there are so many people in the world that are hated or whose lives could potentially be in danger just because of who they are. And look, I'm not particularly religious. I probably consider myself more spiritual than anything. But the fact that some people hide behind religion or they use it as an excuse to be hateful, it boggles my mind. Like, that shit genuinely does not compute up here in this old noodle. Because regardless of what you believe and regardless of who you believe in, or regardless of if you believe in anything at all, it's an undeniable fact that we all come from the same place. We all come from the same God, if in fact that is where we come from. So I don't know. I'll just never understand why people think it's acceptable to use their God and their God's teachings to hate someone else that their God created. It simply does not make sense to me. Perhaps I sound completely ignorant in saying that as someone who's not well versed on religion, but on a human to human level, that's just how I feel about it, but I digress. Ty was 24 when she made the big move to Tyler, and to the best of my knowledge, she made this move hoping to pursue her dream of becoming a nurse. At the time our story takes place, she had a job working as a nurse's assistant at a local retirement home, and I believe she was in the process of enrolling into the nursing program at Kilgore College, and that's located like 30 minutes outside of Tyler. And I feel like that kind of helps to explain why she maybe made the move. Because not only is she a vivacious and social person with a big personality, making her more suited for big city life, but moving to Tyler from Lufkin also put her an hour closer to her school. So sure, she may not have been moving to a very progressive or LGBTQ friendly area, but Ty really wasn't all that worried about it. Like I said, she was not scared of anything. And if she felt as though living in Tyler better suited her to follow her dreams, she wasn't going to let anything hold her back. She had absolutely no reason to believe that within 6 months of making this move, she would be dead. And that, my friends, unfortunately, brings us to the early morning hours of Monday, January 26th, 2015. When the residents of the 400 block of West 24th Street had tucked themselves into bed that previous night, the night of Sunday, January 25th, they had no idea the absolute horror that was about to play out on their quiet little street. Just after 2:30 in the morning on the 26th, a concerned resident of West 24th placed a call to 911 after receiving some very distressing information from her grandchildren. The caller herself had already been sleeping, and she hadn't heard any of the commotion out on the street. However, her grandchildren were either still awake at the time, or they too had been sleeping, but unlike their grandmother, their sleep was interrupted when they heard what sounded like a series of 5 rapid succession gunshots. They then went into their grandmother's room, woke her up, and told her what they had heard, prompting her to peek out of her window to see what, if anything, she could see. And while she wasn't able to catch a glimpse of anyone running around toting guns, she did see that there was a vehicle that appeared to have wrecked into a telephone pole that I believe was catty-corner to her home. She wasn't able to give the 911 dispatcher any specifics about the vehicle, given that the headlights were still on and they were pointing in the direction of her window, but she did relay the information about the gunshots, leading to a fairly quick response time from local law enforcement. Now, as police approached the scene of the accident, I don't believe that they were too terribly concerned, at least not right off the bat. Sure, the gunshots concerned them, but as far as what they were looking at, car accident-wise, things didn't really look all that bad. Little did they know, though, that they were about to uncover a scene much more grisly than any of them were truly prepared for. However, as soon as they began looking over the scene and the car and the driver, it did not take them long to realize that this was no ordinary fender bender. For starters, the driver of the vehicle, not only was she slumped over in the driver's seat, completely unresponsive, but she also appeared to be bleeding way too heavily in comparison to this seemingly mild car accident that she'd just been in. For an automobile accident of the caliber that this vehicle had seemed to have been through, sure, you might expect blood from the nose or the mouth, maybe a cut on the head or face, but the driver of this vehicle appeared to be bleeding from her shoulder and her side and more like the trunk area of her body. And speaking of blood, there was a lot of it, like all over the car. There was blood on the steering wheel, on the dashboard, on the windshield. There was blood all over the doors. There was just way too much blood and blood spatter in this car to be explained away by a car accident alone. And then, upon further examination, everything about the scene they were looking at suddenly became crystal clear. During their preliminary exam of the vehicle and of the driver, police were able to locate 5 separate bullet holes, indicating 5 shots that had been fired. And devastatingly, 4 out of those 5 shots had made contact with their victim. And as I'm sure you've likely guessed by now, this victim was in fact Ty Underwood. They were able to confirm her identity with not only her driver's license, but also with numerous pieces of mail that they recovered from inside the vehicle. And sadly, despite a valiant effort from emergency medical personnel on the scene, Ty would ultimately be declared dead right there on West 24th Street. According to her autopsy, Ty sustained gunshot wounds to her right shoulder, her left shoulder, her right forearm, and her left palm. She ultimately succumbed to a punctured right lung, assumed to have been caused by the bullet that hit her right shoulder, passing through and then down into her lung. Her cause of death was determined to have been blood loss from that punctured lung. She was just 24 years old, and with her passing, police were now investigating much more than a vehicle accident. Instead, they now had a murder on their hands. Immediately after Ty's body was taken from the scene, police cordoned off their crime scene and they began sweeping the area for potential evidence as well as for potential witnesses. They were able to speak to the 911 caller, who confirmed with them most of what they already knew based on what she'd told the dispatcher. However, beyond that, given the fact that it was like 3 a.m. by this point, most, if not all, of the other neighbors in the area either didn't answer the door when police knocked, or those who did answer came down still half asleep and claimed to have not heard or seen anything. I mean, as far as witness statements go, they were really bare bones, if you will. Thankfully, though, as far as physical and forensic evidence went, well, that was at least slightly more plentiful. For starters, they were quickly able to determine, given a couple of different factors, that Ty's attack had likely been a targeted and personal one. Like, they were almost certain that it had not been random. Because not only had her purse, phone, cash, wallet, all of her personal items been left in her vehicle untouched, but just the nature of the crime in and of itself screamed that it was personal. Ty had been shot 5 times, which that alone isn't something you would expect to see in a random act of violence. No, 5 relatively close-range gunshots was definitely very much giving overkill and crime of passion all on its own. But beyond that, as police began to sort of recreate the accident and the circumstances surrounding it, well, it was a really grim and frankly disturbing picture that they were starting to put together. Based on Ty's tire tracks and paint transfer on a nearby mailbox, broken glass, shell casings in the area in which Ty was actually shot, police actually deduced that Ty had likely been shot while she was driving. She'd been shot on her right side, so assumably a passenger in her own vehicle was actually to blame for what had happened to her. So someone she likely knew and likely trusted did this to her. And as if that wasn't horrible enough, the evidence at the scene also supported the theory that the shooter had continued firing at Ty from outside of the vehicle as well, as she had desperately tried to drive away. It appeared as though she had lost control of the vehicle as she tried to escape. She'd wrecked into a nearby mailbox, which actually spun her car all the way around, forcing her back in the direction she'd come from, before she ultimately wrecked into the telephone pole, stopping her altogether. Oh, and oh my god, just like the most heart-wrenching thing I think there is to know about all of this is that because of the way that Ty's vehicle's tires were dug into the grass, police theorized that she was still alive when she'd wrecked, and that she had actually thrown her car into reverse and tried to back out of the scene of the wreck, likely in an effort to try to find help. Sadly, though, because of how badly she had been injured, even if she'd managed to get her car out of the grass and to get back on the road, I don't think police are under the impression that she would have made it very far in her pursuit to save her life. She had just been too critically injured, and likely before she'd even hit the telephone pole, she was probably already past the point of being able to be saved. And I can just not even try to begin to wrap my mind around how absolutely terrifying those last few moments of Ty's life actually were. To know that you're dying and to be able to feel yourself fading away and to just desperately want to find a way to save yourself. She was probably thinking that if she could just get the car to move, that maybe she would be okay. And that is not even taking into consideration the likely all-consuming fear that she was facing, not knowing whether or not her attacker was truly gone and truly done, or if now, because she was stuck, having to wonder if they were going to come back right then and there and finish the job. It is just absolutely gut-wrenching to even briefly imagine how terrified and truly helpless Ty must have felt in her final moments. And you know what else is haunting? Ty's music was still playing when police arrived on the scene. I don't know, maybe I'm just overdramatic, but for some reason, that piece of information was so eerie to me. It is just such a chilling reminder that, like, when you die, life really does just carry on around you like nothing happened. I don't know. I don't really know how to convey in words why it gives me the chills. It just does. Obviously, once police realized that the music was coming from her phone, they disconnected it and they took it in for evidence. However, the problem with that was that, along with being locked by a passcode, which obviously they didn't know, Ty's phone also died relatively quickly once police had found it and bagged it as evidence, so they were unable to use it right away to help point them in any particular direction. Thankfully, though, like I said, there had been some mail in Ty's car, which they had been able to use to help identify her, but it obviously also told them exactly where she lived. Not that they couldn't have figured that out through other avenues. I mean, they are the police, but having her mail and her ID just made the whole process easier and faster. So, armed with this information, police proceeded to Ty's home in order to break the devastating news of her death to her roommates. Ty and her roommate Kenya had been inseparable best friends since they had been in second grade. Also, being a transgender woman, Kenya just understood things about Ty and what she had been through more than anyone else possibly ever could have, and vice versa. The two had grown up together, they had figured out their identities together, they'd moved to Tyler together. They were supposed to spend their lives together, just ride or die best friends until the very end. So it should go without saying that the news that Ty had not only passed away, but that she had been murdered, it was incredibly heartbreaking for Kenya. It turned her life completely upside down. Even sitting in an interview room at the police station, Kenya still couldn't seem to wrap her head around the reality of the situation. Police would be talking to her, asking her questions, and all of a sudden, she would just have to stop them and clarify with them again that Ty was really gone. She just kept asking them, is my friend really dead? And oh my God, it is incredibly difficult and really sad to watch. There's a reason that denial is categorized as the first stage of grief, because God damn, it's really true. It can just be so hard to wrap your brain around these devastating losses, especially when they happen so suddenly and so unexpectedly. Obviously, everyone's grief journey is different and unique to them individually, but for some, the denial stage alone can take years to get past. And gut-wrenchingly, that was very obviously the stage that Kenya was in, as she did her best to answer questions for police. Obviously, police wanted to know everything that they possibly could about Ty and about what was going on in her life prior to her death. Anything that might help them point their investigation in a tangible direction. Prior to speaking to Kenya, police were actually slightly leaning towards what happened to Ty maybe being a hate crime, because it's no secret that there are some really sick and disgusting, hateful people out there that absolutely would snuff out someone's life just because they didn't agree with the way that they chose to live it. And given the hyper-conservative and hyper-religious area they were working in, I don't think police were super far off in this theory. But in speaking to Kenya, in spite of how grief-stricken and shaken she was by Ty's death, she was very quickly able to put the hate crime narrative on pause with the introduction of a new person of interest. You see, what police didn't know, and Kenya was able to fill them in on, was that Ty had been seeing someone in the weeks leading up to her death. And as we all know all too well, if and when someone is killed, the significant other will always fall under immense scrutiny. And Ty's apparent love interest was no exception. While Ty and this man had only been seeing each other for a few weeks and likely weren't super serious, Kenya did inform police that the man had spent the night at their house on more than one occasion and that he and Ty were definitely more than just friends. So who was this mystery man? You're likely wondering. Well, Carlton Ray Champion Jr. was born on January 12th, 1994 in Gregg, Texas, to his parents Carlton Ray Champion Sr. and Pamela Smith. He was actually one of two twin boys. He and his brother Corey were both born that day. However, beyond that, I unfortunately was not able to find that many specifics on Carlton's upbringing. There really wasn't much out there publicly, at least that I could personally find. Basically, all I was able to find to reference was that he had a rough upbringing. He was kind of a troublemaker, and he definitely got into some legal snafus while he was still a juvenile. Obviously, I wasn't able to access any of that information, given that that stuff's typically locked down pretty hard for underage offenders. However, what I can tell you is that by the end of high school, Carlton seems to have sort of gotten his life together, and a lot of sources seem to credit this to him finding a passion for football. But regardless of what actually led him to turn things around, Carlton did seem to be trying to do so. He brought his grades up, he graduated high school, and he even got himself enrolled into Texas College in Tyler, Texas. And in case you're not familiar, because I wasn't, Texas College is a predominantly Black, co-ed, private, and faith-based institution. And it's actually one of the historically Black colleges and universities that were founded before the Civil Rights Act for the sole purpose of educating African Americans. Now, despite being 21 years old, Carlton was actually only a freshman at the time that our story takes place. And again, given the lack of background information I was able to find, I can only speculate as to why this was, but based on what I could find, I think that it might have had something to do with some legal issues he found himself dealing with around 2013. In early December 2013, Carlton was arrested for the unauthorized use of a motor vehicle, which it looks like he might have spent 180 days in jail for before being released onto a 4-year probation period. Again, this is all speculation on my part. Well, not the UUMB charge or the probation, that all I know was true. I'm just not sure if it actually had anything to do with why he didn't start college until a few years after he graduated high school. And honestly, it's really neither here nor there, other than to lead you into knowing that at the time that this was all going down, Carlton was on probation, which does kind of become important later. But as far as life for Carlton since starting college, from what I was able to gather, things seem to have been going fairly well for him. He was living on campus in a dorm, he was doing fairly well with his studies, and he even managed to score a spot on the Texas College football team. And we all know that these stereotypical Bible towns, for some reason, put a lot of stock into their local high school and college sports. So undoubtedly, by landing a spot on this team, Carlton got a massively overinflated sense of self. Now he was a champion off and on the field. Big fat bummer for Carlton, though. Everything he had strived for and everything he'd been working towards, well, it was all about to fall apart right in front of his eyes when police showed up at his dorm room to question him about Ty's murder. But before we get into that, I'm going to take my break, throw on my lashes, and when we get back, girl, Carlton be lying. Don't go nowhere. All right, so we're back, and just before our break, police were heading out to have a conversation with Ty's newest romantic interest. Now, initially, when speaking to police, Carlton did admit to knowing Ty. He explained to police that they had met on Plenty of Fish, and that once they began talking past that point, they communicated solely on an app called Kik. And because I'm apparently geriatric, I had to Google what the hell Kik even was.
I love the young people.
Now, apparently it's, at least from what I was able to deduce, kind of like if Snapchat and WhatsApp had a baby. It's like WhatsApp in the sense that it protects your personal information and you don't have to give out like your real phone number or any actual identifying information. Instead, you communicate with people through a specific username, and people can only find you to speak with you if they have that exact username. And then I guess where you might be able to say that it's similar-ish to Snapchat is that the records of your conversations and things like that, I guess they don't last forever. I don't know. Like I said, I don't think that I've ever even heard of Kik prior to researching this case, so I'm not really versed on the ins and outs of it. And what's crazy about that to me is that at the time all of this was taking place, Ty and I were roughly the same age. We were both in our early 20s in 2015. So I guess the difference is that I was already with my husband, so I had the luxury of not having to use these apps to communicate with and to meet people. Because sure, I think we all know now, but in the infancy of these dating apps and these alternatives to in-person meetings that we have now, I really don't think that people realized just how potentially dangerous these methods of meeting people truly could be. I mean, I can think of at least 10, if not more, true crime cases that center around dating apps, but I'm getting off track. The point is, Carlton and Ty met on a dating app, that much he admitted. However, beyond that, he tried to tell police that the two of them had only ever met in person one time. And this immediately caught police's attention because they knew from talking to Kenya that that wasn't true. According to Kenya, Carlton had been to she and Ty's apartment at least a handful of times in the weeks leading up to her death. So the fact that Carlton was seemingly lying right out the gate,
that's suspicious.
And then even more interesting, I guess you could say, was Carlton's revelation to police that he and Ty were actually supposed to meet up the very night that she was killed. Yeah, just according to him, they were supposed to meet up that night, Sunday the 25th, but evidently he assumed that Ty had ghosted him when she had apparently abruptly stopped responding to his messages. And hearing this, police are like, hey, speaking of those messages, would you mind if we took a look at the communications between you and Ty? Because I mean, if he's being honest, what problem would he have in giving police his phone so they could give the chats a once-over? They hadn't been able to get into Ty's phone yet, so maybe Carlton's phone and his messages could help to give them a jump start on things until, they're able to gain access to Ty's phone. Unfortunately, though, wouldn't you know it, just that morning, Carlton had run out of storage on his phone, which had prompted him to do basically a full factory reset. He had completely wiped everything. So, to recap, Carlton's story is that, yes, he knew Ty, but that they certainly were not dating. They were just friends, and their friendship was actually so surface level that Carlton claimed he didn't even know that Ty was transgender. He claimed that he simply had not known Ty well enough for her to have disclosed that information to him. Shoot, he'd never even so much as been in Ty's car before, according to him. He asserted to police that he had never even once left his dorm room the night that Ty was killed, and he even agreed to let them take a sample of his DNA before they left. So while they certainly left with less than they were hoping, I definitely wouldn't say that they left empty-handed. Sure, they couldn't arrest Carlton based on any of the evidence that they currently had, but he had definitely given them enough information to look into that they could easily either confirm or refute. Unfortunately, though, before they would be able to do that, they would need to gain access to Ty's phone. Now, from what I was able to gather, police can access Kik messages. Kik stores all of its data on its servers, even deleted information. But before they will give access to that data to law enforcement, they have to present them with either a warrant, a court order, or a subpoena. But if they can present legal reason to need them, yes, they can access your Kik chats. The issue here was that they didn't really want to have to wait to do all of that and to jump through all of those hoops. I mean, who knows how long following those avenues and getting the messages directly from Kik could have possibly taken. They didn't want to give Carlton any more potential time to hide or to destroy evidence. No, they needed to gain access to Ty's phone as quickly as they possibly could without having to involve any sort of middleman. The problem with that, though, as previously mentioned, was that Ty's phone was passcode protected. So if police went in blind and they just started banging around on the keyboard hoping to strike gold, they ran the risk of locking themselves out of Ty's phone altogether, and this would have effectively forced them to go the whole court order subpoena route. They knew that they had to be incredibly strategic in their attempts at unlocking Ty's phone, because they knew that with every failed attempt, they were walking a finer and finer line. Thankfully, though, Ty's password ended up being 1024, or 1024, the corresponding numbers to Ty's October 24th birthday. And while this certainly wasn't the first combination of numbers they tried, the important thing is that it was high enough up on the list that they got into Ty's phone before they had locked themselves out. And with their now unfettered access to Ty's phone, they had unlocked a treasure trove of new information, most of which completely contradicted everything Carlton had told them. After just briefly scrolling through his messages with Ty, it became incredibly obvious that not only were he and Ty absolutely romantically involved, but given some saucy photos that the two had exchanged, as well as the fact that we know that he had spent nights at Ty's with her, well, despite what he had claimed when he was speaking to police, Carlton had absolutely, undeniably, 1000% known that Ty was transgender. And this was something that Kenya had assured police of from the very beginning. You see, she and Ty actually had a friend of theirs, another transgender woman, who had also been murdered. And her killer had been someone that she was romantically involved with who did not know that she was transgender. And so when he found out, he got drunk, tracked her down, and beat her and shot her in the head. And from that point on, Ty and Kenya had made a pact with one another that they would never meet up with a man without making sure that that man knew exactly what he was getting into. So to Kenya, the idea that Ty would have ever lied to Carlton about who she was, it just wasn't plausible. And now, armed with these messages, police were able to confirm that Ty had, in fact, been upfront and honest with Carlton from the very beginning. Something that Carlton clearly was not so much with police. And then even on top of all the lies that they had already debunked up to this point, they still weren't done. Yeah, they also uncovered some messages between Carlton and Ty leading up to her death that were very, I'll say, telling. For starters, Ty had most certainly not ghosted Carlton, as he had so manipulatively tried to lead police to believe she had. Rather, the two of them did make plans to meet up, and these plans did seem to have taken place, but this definitely was not going to be a happy rendezvous between lovers. It was going to be quite the contrary, actually. For hours leading up to the time of Ty's death, it actually appeared as though she and Carlton were in a pretty heated argument. I guess at some point, Ty and Carlton had decided that they were serious enough to delete their dating apps, but it looks as though Carlton did not. And then Ty found out about it, and so understandably, she was pissed. She confronted Carlton about it, and they started arguing. Things got pretty heated until eventually they made plans to meet up. Carlton told Ty to meet him on 25th Street, so just a half a mile from the college and just one street over from where Ty would ultimately be killed. And according to the text messages, Ty got to the meetup location first, and she texted Carlton and told him she was there. And it kind of seemed like she was pissed that he wasn't already there. Like, you picked this spot and you live spitting distance from it, and you're gonna make me wait here for you? He responded to her and told her that he was about to leave his dorm, but this just seemed to have added fuel to Ty's fire. My guess is that she felt disrespected, as if he wasn't really taking this argument or this meetup even remotely seriously, which then prompted Ty to instead threaten Carlton that she was going to come to the school and confront him at his dorm, which Carlton was not down for. And that was evident by his response of, "No, you're not. Chill." Ty responded just simply K to this message at 2:06 a.m., which is where the conversation appears to have ended. Yes, their conversation ended exactly 30 minutes prior to the 911 call reporting Ty's accident. And so, with all of that, it kind of sounds like police had everything they could possibly need, right?
No, not really.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely had a lot of stuff sitting in front of them now that could absolutely incriminate Carlton. The problem they were facing now was that they had stumbled onto so much information that some of the content on Ty's phone actually started to muddy up the investigative waters, so to speak. Because while, yes, Ty and Carlton had made plans to meet up the night she was killed, it also looked as though she had been in the process of trying to set up plans to meet with a different man as well. And honestly, I don't really want to harp on this point too much, because in the grand scheme of things, I don't really think it's all that important. Based on the timing of the texts and the argument that she was simultaneously in with Carlton, my opinion is that she was only trying to set this meeting up as a means of getting back at her potentially cheating boyfriend. Ty had been texting this guy around 1 a.m., so like an hour before she planned to meet up with Carlton, and as soon as they had decided to head to 25th Street to meet up, Ty had stopped communicating with this other guy. Now, police did look into him. I mean, obviously it would have been irresponsible not to, given the proximity of his conversation with Ty in regards to her death. But after an interview and a voluntary polygraph test, this man was cleared of any suspicion in regards to Ty's murder. And so, where does that bring us? Well, it loops us right back around to Carlton. So, police head back out to his dorm, not only to confront him about the many, many, many lies he apparently told them, but they were also in the process of securing a search warrant for his dorm. So my understanding is they were going to see if he would voluntarily submit to his dorm being searched or if he would refuse and make them wait until they actually had the papers in their hands. And y'all, if Carlton was all sweet and polite and charming in their first meeting, talking about if I ever killed someone, I'd have to turn myself in because I have too much of a conscience.
Okay.
Y'all, this man was the polar opposite in dealing with police this second time around. He was clearly agitated at the fact that they had even come back to speak with him again in general, but then when they started talking about warrants and searching his dorm, he very quickly became angry and argumentative, repeatedly telling them that they were wrong, he never lied, and that they were wasting their time talking to him. Just blah, 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 blah. Even as they showed him with his own two eyes the messages on Ty's phone where he had told her to meet him on 25th Street, he stood 10 toes down in front of Jesus and everybody, and he tried to tell them that he had not been the one to send those messages. Now, it didn't really matter. Police, they knew he was full of shit, but because he had refused to give them verbal consent to search his dorm, they were kind of in like a limbo, waiting for the paperwork to come through. However, once it did, they confiscated a shirt, a pair of jeans, a coat, and a pair of shoes, all of which they were planning to submit for forensic testing. Ooh, and they also paid a visit to the Texas College security office, and they requested to review the CCTV footage from the night/early morning that Ty was killed. And after hours of scrubbing through this footage, big fucking surprise, guess who they see? Yep, they see our boy, Carlton Champion Jr., heading out of the dorms right before Ty was murdered and returning in quite a rush right after. Like, at this point, homie has lied so many times, the police are almost certain that if they bring him in and they confront him with all of the evidence they have, he's going to crack. Because it's not like they're dealing with some high-powered mob boss, right? They're dealing with a God-fearing college boy. So surely they can play on his conscience and get the truth out of him. I mean, he himself told police that he would never be able to live with himself if he killed someone. So he's got to be itching to confess and to clear his mind.
Nope.
Yeah, it turns out that Carlton Champion Jr. is, at the very least, like borderline sociopathic, in my opinion. Because while I am certainly not trained or qualified in any way, shape, or form to diagnose someone formally with anything, as a human with 2 functioning eyeballs and a brain, I can see an apparent lack of regard for anyone else's rights or feelings just as well as the next person. And as far as I can see, my friends, Carlton Champion Jr. has no regard for right and wrong, and he very much appears to not care about the rights or the feelings of others. When they brought him into the station for a formal interrogation on January 29th, this man did nothing but laugh at all of their questions and then repeatedly ask them for a burger. Yeah, I wish I was kidding. They brought this man in handcuffs after arresting him for a probation violation, and somehow he was still just cutting the fuck up. Sidebar, I don't really have any details about what exactly he did to violate his probation. For all I know, they violated him for providing false statements to police within this investigation itself, but don't know, couldn't tell ya. All I know is they brought him in handcuffs that day, and from that point on, behind bars is where he's remained. Initially, like I said, it was on his probation violation charge, but as soon as the forensic testing from Ty's car as well as from Carlton's clothing came in, because they were able to pull his DNA from Ty's car and her blood from his clothes, Carlton Ray Champion Jr. would officially be charged with the first-degree murder of Ty Underwood just days after pulling the trigger and ending her life. Now, despite the mountain of evidence that police had against him, Carlton still opted to maintain his innocence and to plead guilty to the charges against him. So off to trial he went. Now, personally, I think he did this because he was banking on the fact that because Tyler is such a conservative town, just planting the idea in the heads of the jury that Ty might have lied to him about being transgender, I think he was hoping that the jury would just clutch their pearls and acquit him just based on their religious biases. Like, it wasn't exactly the gay panic defense, but I don't know, it kind of seems like some sort of variation of it. Regardless, though, I'll let you decide how you think it worked out for him. Carlton was indicted by a grand jury in late April of 2015, and his trial officially began in early December. The prosecution argued that Carlton had murdered Ty out of fear of people discovering their relationship, that when Ty had threatened to confront him at his dorm, he had decided to kill her in order to keep people from finding out that he was seeing a transgender woman. Because, you know, heaven forbid that his Bible-thumping jock friends find out that he was in an unconventional relationship. Don't get me wrong, he was a football player at a very conservative school in a very conservative town. So as reprehensible as it is, he probably wasn't wrong to think that he would face judgment and scrutiny and backlash. And not just from his family and friends and peers, but I'd also venture to guess that school faculty and the community in general would have likely had some shit to say. I'm not in any way justifying the outing of someone's sexual preferences or experimentations before they're ready. This should have been a conversation that the two of them had when the relationship began. If Carlton wasn't comfortable being public with Ty and what they had going on, he should have expressed that from the beginning. And if Ty wasn't comfortable being kept a secret, then she had the ability at that point to walk away. I do not think waiting until you are in a heated argument with someone is the best time to start dictating new and serious relationship dynamics. Regardless of all that, though, the bottom line is that when push came to shove, Carlton killed Ty because of a situation that he put himself in. After Ty threatened to show up at the school, Carlton, armed with a 9mm handgun, left his dorm, having, in my opinion, every intention in the world to kill Ty in an effort to protect his secret and ultimately to protect his reputation. And infuriatingly, even at his murder trial, Carlton could not be bothered to even pretend to give a fuck about what he'd done. Apparently, his lawyer was constantly having to remind him to stop smiling and stop laughing and overall just to shut up. Like, he was apparently totally fine with receiving physical benefits from Ty, if you catch my drift. But when he was on trial for her murder, he couldn't even so much as pretend to acknowledge the importance of her life. He was looking at anywhere from 5 to 99 years in prison, and he still couldn't even act as if he was remorseful. Like, truly, his complete lack of interest in the fact that he had robbed another human being of their life, It was scary. Even when the jury returned and announced that they had found him guilty of murdering Ty, even that couldn't knock a sense of reality into him. He blatantly resisted as 4 officers attempted to escort him from the courtroom, all while he mocked and tormented Ty's family, telling them that they hadn't seen the last of him and that eventually he would be out of jail and back on the streets, as if he hadn't done and said enough already. Thankfully, though, after witnessing this outburst, coupled with all of the other tomfoolery that they had witnessed throughout Carlton's trial, the jury really didn't seem all too keen on the idea of him being back on the street anytime soon. So ultimately, after just 45 minutes, they decided on a life sentence for Carlton. A life sentence and a $10,000 fine. And although his sentence does carry the opportunity for parole, his first chance in front of the parole board isn't until 2045. Granted, I cannot imagine that he will be granted parole at that time, given his blatant lack of remorse and his lack of accountability and the fact that he'll only be, in his 50s? I feel like that is not quite aged out of crime enough to turn him back loose then. At least not in my opinion. In 2016, following his conviction and following his sentencing, Carlton did try to appeal his conviction on the grounds that essentially he was framed by police. However, ultimately that attempt at appeal was denied, meaning that for now, Carlton Ray Champion Jr. remains incarcerated at the Memorial Unit of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice in Brazoria County, Texas, to this day. Oh, and I guess I should make mention quickly that following this whole debacle with Carlton, one of the football coaches at Texas College, Leonard Smith, he actually came forward and claimed that Carlton was never on the Texas College football team. Coach Smith claimed that, yes, Carlton had tried out, but that he had never made the team and that he had never played a single game for them. He supposedly even provided a roster to police in the wake of Ty's murder in an effort to corroborate these claims, but when I tell you everything you read about this case, every headline you see, every source there is out there, everything refers to Carlton as a college football player. So because of this, there is definitely some speculation that Coach Smith only came forward with this information to try to protect the college's image. Obviously, I can't say what's true and what's not, so I'm just doing my due diligence in providing you any and all potentially relevant information that I was able to gather. What you do with the information I provide, that's up to you. But yeah, rest in peace to poor Ty, affectionately referred to as Noonie by those who loved her. She was just 24 years old when her life was senselessly taken from her. She was kind and loving and such a light to those who knew her. She was robbed of her life. She was robbed at her chance at love and to have a family, her chance to follow her dreams. All because this egotistical jock thought that his reputation was worth more than a human life. And what's even more devastating is that Ty is far from the first, as well as far from the last transgender person to lose their life like this, simply for just trying to live authentically to themselves. It is statistically proven that transgender individuals experience a dramatically higher prevalence of IPV, intimate partner violence, compared to cisgender individuals. Simply for being transgender, these individuals are automatically predisposed to a higher likelihood of experiencing physical violence, physical injury, sexual violence, stalking, psychological aggression, emotional or mental abuse, coercive control, and yes, even homicide at the hands of an intimate partner. In 2015, so the exact year that Ty was murdered, the US Transgender Survey reported that 54% of participants had at some point experienced some form of IPV within their lives. Ty was among the first of 21 transgender women reported murdered in 2015. And then sadly, the following year, that number grew to 27. And almost all of those victims were transgender women of color. Truly, the statistics are staggering if you really start looking into them and start picking them apart. And I'd venture to say that most of this animosity is just ignorance and hate that has been perpetuated through the years throughout society. It's the old, if it's not the way I do it, then it's wrong rhetoric. I just do not understand why, as a society, we cannot seem to learn to be more accepting of people and of who they are. If people are not hurting others, which transgender individuals are certainly not, then shut up and let people live how they want to live. People can do whatever they want in their bedrooms and with their own bodies. We don't condemn people for getting breast implants or nose jobs or freaking BBLs, and we certainly would never think to condemn someone for getting a life-saving medical procedure. So I just do not understand where people get off being so quick to chastise and to condemn people for simply wanting to have their outward appearance match their inner persona. Honestly, if you take the rate of suicidal ideation in transgender adults pre-gender affirming surgery and you compare it to the significant reduction in suicidal ideation in transgender adults post-gender reaffirming surgery, I suppose there would be an argument to be made that gender reaffirming surgery in and of itself could be considered a life-saving procedure. And I know I've gotten in the weeds here, but it's like anything. If we remove or even reduce the societal stigma that there is surrounding transgender individuals living the way they want to live, then maybe there could at least be a drop in the very real violence that they face just for being who they are. Following Ty's death, her friends and family organized a vigil in her honor, a vigil that not only gathered support from a surprising amount of this ultra-conservative city, but just Ty's death in general helped to initiate some really important conversations throughout Tyler regarding safety and humanization of the LGBTQIA+ community in Tyler. I will say though, just based on this one case, I do want to give credit where credit is due and commend the police department in this case. They appear to have really taken charge with this investigation, and they really do seem to have treated Ty's death as a priority. Something that historically is not always the case with victims that society might typically cast aside as lesser. And with that, you guys, we are about wrapped for today. Let me know your thoughts on this case in the comments down below. As always, I thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video and to listen to this story. If you have a case or a topic you'd like to see me cover, please fill out the case submission form that I have linked down in the description. And if by chance you're interested in anything about today's makeup, I will make sure to also have all of the information and the links for the products I used today listed down there as well. If you haven't already and you'd like to, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. I put out new videos every 10 days. The date of my next video should be on the screen here now for you, but if you turn on your post notifications, you'll always be notified when I do post, and you'll always be sure to catch me back here in my next one. But until then, stay safe and have a good week. Bye! Oh god, ew. Type 5. Y'all, I really thought doing this a couple days after 4th of July would kill the firework issue, but it's not, and I'm sorry. During their 4th of July is fucking over. Oh my god. Oh boy. Oh boy. Why is all my makeup so gross? Need y'all judging me as if y'all don't know I'm nasty. What have been going on in Ty's little... No. No. To need them, yes. Ooh. Actually, fuck. Glitter glue. Glitter glue. Oh my god. Carlton had blame was with... Yeah. We're done here.